the big question people have? Like, what's the thing everybody's wondering about? What's the thing I don't understand? What would I want to hear?
It's like, that's Big's Darklighter's home. So how did you know? Because I'm a nerd.
Cassie and Jim on the beach, and people are like, no. I can literally hear people that go, no.
Because Darth Vader was the scariest thing that had ever happened to anybody, and this guy literally looks like the devil.
What are you doing, C-3PO? I'm taking one last look at my friends. These aren't your friends.
And I get a later call that said, yeah, you probably want to use Wedge Antilles.
That spirit of doing everything they can to tell the story they want to tell, I think really comes through on Star Wars.
You don't do that. There is no try.
I joke that the best thing about writing Princess Leia is everybody knows who she is, and the worst thing about writing Princess Leia is everyone knows who she is.
It doesn't look like they're even hungry. When they get out, they're not just like, did you bring a Snickers or something?
I'm honored to be here. I'm also impressed that you got Zach Galifianakis as a guest tonight.
That's so funny.
I've always been kind of a closet Star Wars fan up until, maybe 15, 20 years ago.
I'm just sort of a fan hoping to bring other fans along. That's all I'm doing.
The galaxy isn't growing to push people out. It's growing to let more people come in and find their love so that it's able to continue and create this connective tissue that grows forever.
Where now I feel like I can't do that because somebody's going to turn it into a blog post and then it's going to become a whole thing.
I have had the best time ever on Around the Galaxy.
Coming back to a show that I dearly love and admire, so thanks for having me.
Well, welcome to Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars fan talk show. I am your host, Pete Fletzer. If you're hanging out with us live while we're recording, well, thank you so much. That means you're a patron. You got this secret link. You're able to hang out with us. And if you're catching this on the replay, well, you can join us as part of our Patreon program, patreon.com/ATGcast. For as little as $3 a month, you can be part of these conversations. Hang out with us when I get to talk to amazing guests. Like tonight, I have the opportunity to speak to a New York Times best-selling comic book writer, actress, just all the she's written for He-Man and Netflix and sci-fi. It's a laundry list of everything you've probably watched and where you've been. She's also done some things most recently, which I discovered as I was doing some research, something for Joan Jett, which I want to talk to her about in just a minute. So instead of me just rambling on, I want to bring in Amanda Deibert. Amanda, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I mean, I can't complain. It's a opportunity to hang out and talk to somebody about who's got a Star Wars background, but also some really interesting stuff. Amanda, how are you? How is things?
Things are good. I'm pretty excited to be here. I'm really excited to talk Star Wars and all the other random things.
So so it's interesting. When I started Around the Galaxy 3 years ago, the sort of objective is to sort of capture that moment when a couple Star Wars fans meet for the first time, regardless of whether they have, they've been creators or just super fans or whatever. And this is truly one of those completely walking in blind situations. All I did was I did a little research. I discovered that you had written the new stories of I'm going to get the title wrong because there's so many comic books that come out. The Stories of the
Hyperspace Stories.
Hyperspace Stories.
Yes.
Tales of the Jedi comes out next week on Disney Plus. I'm all confused, but yes, Hyperspace Stories, and it's going back to Darkhorse Comics, which is exciting.
Mm-hmm.
But for people who may not know you yet, tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up working on this really cool new series.
Well, this is my first foray into the Star Wars universe, so I'm super long-time fan, but first time writing anything for Lucasfilm or for Star Wars. So I'm really excited about that. My background is, as you mentioned, I am a comic book writer and a television writer. So I've done a lot of stuff for DC, DC superhero girls, Wonder Woman 77, Teen Titans Go, just a bunch of stuff. I do some horror comics for John Carpenter. I've done some DC horror. I also write TV, like I did Netflix, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. So lots of nerdy, fun, comic booky stuff. But this is my first time in the Star Wars universe. So I'm pretty.
So you did issue 1, which came out in August, and you also wrote issue 4, right? That comes out in December. Is that right?
Is it issue 4 or issue 5? I think it is 4. Yeah, I think it's 4.
Yeah.
The order, like, so behind the scenes, the order of the stories changed a couple times. So then I'm like, wait,
okay.
is it? But yes, it's Rey and Chewbacca on a Life Day adventure is that issue. So I'm very excited about that one. I was like, please give me the Life Day story.
It's so funny how the whole Life Day and Star Wars holiday special, it's like it's gotten so beat up, and rightfully so, but it's now like we love it for some reason. There's something very
that's why I was like, please sign it, because like I'm like, yes, like let's embrace the kitsch of it and also the wonder of Life Day. Please give me the holiday special comic. So I mean, other stories like issue 1 I absolutely love and adore very much, but I'm really excited about this next one, and then the future ones I can't talk about yet because we haven't said who the characters are. So
awesome. Well, it was exciting for me because as a OT fan and kind of went through that dark time, the Darkhorse comics were kind of something that kept me connected, and then they disappeared and came back with this. It's an interesting thing. So you said that you've been a Star Wars fan. Tell me a little bit about your earliest Star Wars experience. When did you first discover
my earliest Star Wars experience is actually pretty bittersweet. It's a light moment in a dark time. My mother was really ill when I was young, and then passed away. But when I was caring for her, there was a summer when I was 12 when I had to stay in the house and to be available to care for her. And Star Wars was marathoning on TV because I was born after it came out in theaters, so I never got to experience the original trilogy on the big screen, but it was marathoning, and I ended up watching the marathon, and it really sucked me in, and I was so grateful to have a world to escape into during that time that it really resonated, and it was something that was there for me in a hard time. So it's something that I've always loved.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how Star Wars, like, it sticks with you, and it doesn't matter when you saw it, but for some reason it stayed with you. Did it influence you to get into your I call it line of work, but that just sounds like such a silly way to talk about some awesome stuff that you get to do? Did it? It's not a job interview either. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? But
the head of the company.
All right, you're hired. That was easy. I'm the easiest interviewer in the world. But did Star Wars play a role in influencing you to get into the comic book world and the fantasy world? Because you're not just in traditional comics, you've done horror and things like that.
Yeah, I really do love fantasy, sci-fi, all this. I think so. I mean, I think that in general, Star Wars and other fun, good storytelling with immersive worlds that you could really lose yourself in general, yes, helped shape who I am and the kinds of things that I want to create, the kinds of stories that interest me, the kinds of characters and worlds that I think are fun. So yeah, I would absolutely say it was a big part of who I am in my life. And then I ended up, when I started dating my wife, she was doing the Star Wars trading cards for Topps, doing the art. And she's done a lot of like art for Lucasfilm. So it's even been a big part of my relationship. Like the first time I went to Celebration was with her while she was in the art show.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it's been a part of my life all the way around.
That's great. It's and so from there you are so what was, let me ask it this way, what was your first comic book writing experience?
This is kind of great. So my first thing that I did some web comics. It was a series called Hot Mess. That was me telling embarrassing stories about my life, and Kat Staggs, who is my wife, but at the time was my girlfriend, illustrated them. And we did that. It was like weekly for about 2 years. And then I kind of submitted to some anthologies. And then I was also, at the time, I was acting as well. And I started doing some comedy videos on YouTube for like some comedy websites. And on Father's Day, I did a funny video that was really about my being an orphan, but kind of tongue in cheek. And it was like me talking about being an orphan on Father's Day and what you do. But like slowly through the video, I morphed into Batman, kind of making a joke about our kinship as orphans. And it ended up getting passed around. And some editors at DC saw it, and this editor at DC contacted me, and she was like, "Hey, I've read your web comic, and it's really great. I just saw this video, and it's really fun. Would you like to write a Wonder Woman comic?" So
yes.
I said yes. I was like, yes, the most iconic female superhero of all time. Would love to take a crack at it. And then I immediately panicked because greatest, most iconic female superhero of all time. I was like, oh,
Right.
sure. Yeah, there's no way that this could go wrong or fans could get mad at me. So this is a great way to start. So that was my start in comics.
Well, and you made a passing reference to the way fans react, and I mean, as a Star Wars fan, as somebody who spends way too much time in social media talking about Star Wars, probably getting in trouble more often than I should just by responding. How do you, as an artist, inevitably, I'm going to guess, I don't know for sure, but I'm going to guess somebody didn't like a take that you may have had with one of the major DC comic people that you've written, or maybe had a very unique response to the way you may have written some DC characters. How do you respond to that? Do you stay away from those sort of things? And I think you, if I read correctly, you engage people in social media a lot more often than some other artists and writers do. But how do you approach it?
Well, I do. I mean, for one thing, I think probably like the healthy, very evolved way to approach it would probably be to not look at it at all.
Right.
But I do. Now, I think that anyone is entitled to not like something. Like, I'm never going to get in an argument with somebody if they don't like my take or anything, because like I'm creating a story art, how that affects you, how you interpret it, how you enjoy it or not is not up to me. I can't control it. It's not, I can put out something that I'm proud of and something that I love and something that I hope speaks to you on some level, but that's it. That's where my job ends. And then you get to experience it however you do. And if it hits you and it resonates, then that is fantastic. And that feels wonderful. And that's what keeps me going, because ultimately I believe that, that storytelling is communication. Right. Like we're doing this to connect with each other. Because otherwise I could just write Star Wars stories in my journal and enjoy them on my own and not care. So I do care how people receive them. But I think it's totally fine for people not to like them.
Does it ever strike you personally, or how do you cope with that? Because again, I mean, I imagine as a writer, I've done some writing in the past, but nothing anywhere near a level like yourself. But the way people respond, because you pour yourself into it. I don't care if it's a 1 day web comic or a full 80-page one-off of some sort. How does it how do you manufacture the response?
I mean, I'm sure if there was something, and I'm fortunate that this has never happened. I'm sure if there was something that I had created that literally everyone hated across the board, that would probably take some time for me to need to, like, I don't know, cocoon myself and be like, wow, that was really hard, because you do put so much into it. But I know not everything's not going to be for everyone. I mean, I don't like all things in every medium. I don't like every television show I watch or every book I read.
Right.
So I don't expect anyone else to either. So like really, I've never gotten really upset about any kind of review or critique or tweet. I have gotten very touched on the other side, though. I have had people, you know, when something really hits someone and connects with them on some level because of whatever they're going through in their life, and they come to me at a convention or online and they talk to me about, you know, I read this story and it reminded me so much of me as a little boy, and like, thank you for writing that. Or like little kids that get all excited and come up and want their comics signed, or just, you know, whatever it is, like, oh, this helped me get through this hard time in my life. Like, those are the moments that I hang on to when I'm not feeling particularly inspired, or when things are hard, or, you know, when I do read something that's like, I don't know, hates whatever I have done to whatever cherished character that has then ruined their entire childhood.
You know, it's interesting. I had a gentleman named David Jesse who does a show called Tatooine Sons. He was on the show, and their perspective for their show, it's a gentleman and his two kids, and they talk about all kinds of pop culture, DC, Marvel, Lord of the Rings, all that stuff, and Star Wars. And he talks about how pop culture is the mythology of our time, and it's a story, the way they put it, I'm going to misquote it, but the story that's written on our souls. And so there's like a bit of a from that perspective, all the places that you've written, from DC, you know, Wonder Woman, and even, you know, taking a John Carpenter story, because he's one of the greats, or a Star Wars story, is it intimidating to get into a franchise, or is it, I mean, like you said, when you got the call, you want to do Wonder Woman, of course you said yes, but how do you approach it? Because there's so much, you do some original stuff as well, which is great. Do you find it more challenging to do an existing franchise, or is it kind of a totally different approach?
I think it is a different approach. I mean, there is, like you said, like, there's the initial excitement of, oh my gosh, I get to do this beloved thing. And then there's the panic attack of, oh my gosh, I'm doing this beloved thing.
Right.
And then you have to put both of those feelings aside, because neither of those are going to help you tell a good story. You know, if you're like too excited and too like, oh my God, in your own fandom, then that can get in the way of your story. And if you're too, oh my God, what is everybody going to think about everything? Then you're going to second guess every decision that you might make. So what you've got to do is just, you know, when you're dealing with an existing character or world versus, you know, when it's your own thing, you can do whatever you want. There's no rules. Nobody's going to tell you that you're writing the character that you created incorrectly. When there's something that's had 70 plus years of history, well, yeah, you can mess up that character. Like, there are certain elements that are just inherent in who these characters are and in this world. And like, you can't suddenly change it and be like, yeah, they don't do lightsabers anymore. They're, you know, it's all swashbuckling pirates. Like, we're just, you know, like, you can't, there are some things that's like, okay, you're not going to do that. So, you know, it's important to do, in my opinion, do your research, be very familiar with the world, very true to the characters, and then tell the best story that you can, and what you want to say and do within that framework. And it's the challenge of working with existing IP, but it's also kind of the joy of it, because there is something very fun to me about being creative within somebody else's set parameters. And like the extra challenge actually, I think, inspires sometimes more creativity and kind of fun. It's like when you're doing live theater and something goes wrong on stage and suddenly everybody comes alive because like the door fell down, and like, how are you going to handle that in character? So I don't know, it has some of that fun aliveness to it.
How did you prepare for Hyperspace stories? What did you have to do to go into that?
Well, for each story, because they all take place, as I'm sure you've noticed just from the few that are out already, each story takes place in kind of a different time period within, you know, the massive Star Wars canon. So I approach each one. We have a connected through line that connects all the stories together, and that's with some new characters that we created specifically for this series. But so there's that to keep in mind and to go through. But then each one, it's doing research specifically. So like with this first one, it was rewatching a bunch of Clone Wars, reading some extra Star Wars novels on particular characters, doing, deep dive research thing. And then, I mean, luckily we have the lovely everyone at Lucasfilm to help if you're like, hey, what ship would this person use for this particular thing in this particular time period? Because as you know, the Star Wars universe is quite large. And sometimes like the nuance of like, okay, but at this particular time in between this film and this film, this one character. And so, we have that to lean on as well. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of rewatching, rereading, looking things up, deep dives into Wikipedia. It's it's a fun time.
It's interesting. I don't know. Do you watch any of the Disney Plus Star Wars content? Or are you watching things like Andor or anything like that?
I haven't started Andor yet. I'm behind on that one. But yes, in general, I have been watching. I'm really excited to start Andor because I'm hearing great things.
I'm really enjoying it. And the reason I reference that is because Tony Gilroy has said it's not that he was necessarily not a Star Wars fan, but he wasn't a Star Wars fan. He just came in and wrote a good story. And I'm curious because what I'm finding with that particular show is that it's a solid story, and there's enough sort of Star Warsiness around it so that as a Star Wars fan, where you are, you're making those connections, and there's little things in there for the people like myself who've spent way too much time talking about Star Wars.
Right.
And when you built your stories for this series, did you work? I mean, I imagine the story group was there to say, well, instead of this planet, what if you said this planet? Was that kind of the way that process worked?
Yes. Absolutely. Though there was we were given some freedom within the parameter. So, like I said, like I was able to like create this new Wookiee character who is going to be very crucial throughout all the stories. And, but it was, that was again with like thinking about like a particular, someone that could be alive for the span of hundreds of years. And because Wookiees can't so it was like, even that is, you have to kind of know something about the Star Wars universe to even know like, okay, I want a Wookiee for this particular reason, which is fun. But then, yeah, there have been times for sure where they have been like, I mean, I've gotten to like create some planets as well, but where they will be like, instead of this planet, let's do this one, or instead of this character, if this character faces this character, that would actually become the first time that they had ever faced off, and we don't want to do that because then it messes up this other thing. So like make it a different Jedi, those kinds of things that when you get into the span again of just all the years of history and you're dealing with like side characters that are not, you have these main characters like, my first story was Anakin and Obi-Wan, which is obviously very established. So there's certain things that we all know, but you get into like some of these other characters and it's like, oh, well, they can't be here because they're here. So, okay, well then we'll use a different Jedi,
Right. Is it similar to working in the DC universe, or is that a completely different sort of story group, if you will?
It, in some ways it's similar in in a lot of ways that you have like these people that can help you with things, but with something like DC, you can get several simultaneous canons going. It doesn't all have to fit the same continuity, in the way that it does within the Star Wars universe, and like when you get into like say the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and how everything fits together. With DC, there's a lot more flexibility if you're doing say a one-off story. You can almost, as long as it's within the character and what they would do, you can pretty much do anything and it's fine, because like, even if someone dies, well, they can also be simultaneously alive over here.
Right. Yeah. And I guess once you get used to that sort of thing, like right now, and that's one of the very interesting, and I don't know, I find it kind of amusing when people get so upset. Well, the lightsaber was green in this episode, but it was blue in that one. It's like, it's storytelling. Let's enjoy it for what it's worth.
Did you like the story?
Right. Well, let's go back. Was it a cool story? Did you remember the story? If all you remember is the lightsaber color, then
then there's a bigger problem with the whole thing. Exactly. And I spent a lot of money.
Now, well, you also have done some of your own stuff, but the thing that caught my eye, and I had no idea that you had done this. I want to know a little bit about the Joan Jett story that you did. It came out in July. I was as a 7 or 8-year-old kid, I was like, I was raised on like The Who and Led Zeppelin and that sort of stuff. And so when Joan Jett came out, I was like, I don't know who she is, but she's awesome. And I love the documentary. And then I saw you did something. Tell me a little bit about that and what was involved in putting that together.
I mean, this is another one of those situations where somebody's like, do you want to write a comic for Joan Jett? And you're like, of course I do. Like, can I pay you, please?
Right.
So it was another very easy. Yeah. So it was with Z2 Comics, and it was a collection of comics, and it's cool. It's like a flip book. So there's all the comics one way and all the comics the other way, to go with an album. And so like it came with, you get the comic, you get this cool album with like, pretty art on the vinyl. And so we each pairing, so it was me writing and then my wife Kat Staggs illustrating, each creator pairing got to do a story based on one of her songs. Mm-hmm. So we get to do Bad Reputation.
Awesome.
So that was my first choice, and I got it. So I was very excited about that. And so it's a futuristic sci-fi fantasy story that is just the story that I came up with. So it's not necessarily like related to the song in that it is inspired by it.
Okay.
We didn't have to go like very literal. You know what I mean? Like it didn't have to be like, and then all the lyrics are there and we're just like illustrating the song. It's just like, take this song and like, what's the vibe and what's the energy? And so like, it's this kind of like fantasy, sci-fi, sexy revolution kind of a situation, with a very cool kind of punk rabble rouser lady who's, changing society.
Right.
Who's very loosely based on a certain rock star.
Very Joan Jett-ish, right? Yeah. Did you get to meet Joan through the process?
I have not. No, that would be lovely and delightful, but I did not get to meet her. Notes were passed back and forth through her. Sure. People, she read and approved all the stories, but I didn't actually get to meet her.
Well, I'm gonna have to absolutely check that out. There's like one of those things. I was like, I have to see what that's all about. Now, you've also written, like I said, I tried to rattle off at the top, but you've written for so many different types of television. I want to talk a little bit about the Al Gore stuff and the Oprah Winfrey Network, but I want to start with, how did you go from comics to television, or was it kind of at the same time? How does that kind of go together?
I was actually doing TV first.
Okay.
I was a television writer, and then, like I said, I started to do the web comics kind of early on when I had just started my television writing career. I was also doing the web comics, so it kind of happened tandemly. Like I kind of like each career sort of grew together, and so I'm just like a person who writes all the things and all the.
So you've done, it's really interesting when you look at it and you go, okay, so on one end we have John Carpenter horror comics. Over here we have science fiction, Star Wars kind of stuff. And then over here we have Al Gore's and working with Oprah Winfrey. What was it like do you prefer sort of that, or how would you compare working on total out there fantasy fiction and hard-hitting stuff like you were doing for Al Gore and on the Oprah Winfrey Network?
It's so hard to compare because they're so different. I love them for different reasons. Obviously, like the fun and the creativity of the sci-fi and the fantasy is something that I love and adore. But it's also really fulfilling in a different way to work on projects that I'm very passionate about and feel, very aligned with the message of. Like when I was working with former Vice President Gore on 24 Hours of Reality, I did that for 4 years in a row. I got to go all over the world with him. It was a 24-hour broadcast where we were live globally for 24 hours. I wrote the entire script by myself, so over 500 pages. We were in a terrorist attack in Paris the first year that I did it. Was when ISIS attacked on November 13th, and went through that, which was really intense while we were live. So I've had a lot of like wild experiences, met a lot of amazing, inspiring people, world leaders to activists to celebrities. And it's, that's something that I care about because I have a child and I want her to have, an earth and a future. And so like those kinds of things are fun and rewarding in their own way. And it is, my resume is definitely, when I say like I write all the things, it's kind of a joke, but it's also like throw spaghetti at a wall and it'll hit a bunch of genres. And I've probably done something like, it's like, of course the He-Man writer is definitely the one that the former vice president goes to for the climate stuff. That makes all the sense. Of course.
Sure. Absolutely. So, and you also do podcasting. You have a handful of podcasts that you're involved in, or at least were at some point.
Yes. I have been a guest on many, and and a co-host on some, and I hosted my own for a while. It's very fun, as you know, to do podcasts.
Yeah. Gives me something to do a couple times a month. That's
absolutely
nice. Now, you mentioned He-Man, and I kind of blazed over that. Let me ask you about the difference between writing for a streaming series and a comic book. I asked before a little bit about the difference between different genres or different universes, but how do you go about it? Is writing for a television series dramatically different? Or, I mean, obviously you have different outcomes, but do you approach the stories differently?
I mean, I guess in terms of how much story you can tell, kind of, yes, because I mean, with comic books, it's a much shorter story, so you've got to think about like your beats in a much more concise way. Whereas with television, you have time for some subplots or just like letting a few more jokes land, but it's still, I mean, especially with animation, like you're still in a pretty tight time frame, and especially with something like He-Man where there's a lot of action, you have to like save time for every time everybody transforms in that montage, every time people fight, and like that's all condensed story time as well. But I mean, the approach, the mediums change and you adjust to them, but you're still ultimately trying to tell a good story, trying to have growth for your characters, trying to have real and authentic responses to things. So ultimately it stays pretty similar.
I've always found it interesting, and I'm curious about when you look at a series, like whether it's He-Man or when I look at, like, for example, some of the Star Wars series, or even like most recently, which I've been just addicted to, House of Dragon, and you look at, it's an overarching story like the He-Man story, but you have people who take different chapters of it, and I always find that as a storyteller, I imagine it must be is it jarring to come in and be like, oh, I'll take these 2-3 pieces of the cake that you're making and make it my own? How does that work?
It is, it's the interesting thing is, often you're kind of creating the framework together, so what's going to happen, and then you take your piece. But inevitably, especially when you're working with big IP or IP that has like multiple companies involved, i.e. with He-Man, you've got Mattel and you've got Netflix, and so you've got like the story you're trying to tell, and then also other companies or places that are part of it, but they also have their own things that they want to do. And so there will be notes and there will be adjustments, and sometimes something that changes in the script that's right before your episode then fundamentally changes your episode. So we're constantly needing to read each other's drafts as well, or get that communication of like, oh, hey, so that big plot point in my script that your whole script hinges on has now completely changed. Or, hey, this whole opening is now going into my script, so you need a different opening in yours because we need to move this moment up. So now, like, hi, this whole thing is over here, and so there is that that collaborative aspect of it, and that sometimes frustrating aspect of it is like things can change pretty drastically based on what somebody else is doing, and then you just have to swing with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I can only imagine you walk into the writing room one day and they're like, by the way, that thing that you're going to be doing, and they probably don't know it, right? They're like, oh, we knocked this character into here, and you're like, oh, well, now what do I do with that? Now I have to move that all around.
Right. Yeah. They're like, this character doesn't die. And you're like, my whole episode's his funeral. Like,
well, Mattel decided he's not dying, right? That's great. Now, you have a lot of female perspective, obviously, in your story, and your stories that you tell. Is that something that you've really tried to bring? Do you bring it consciously? Do you bring representation of both the LGBTQ community and yourself, and women's issues into your work, or does it just naturally happen? And the reason I ask that is because I think that there's in our fandoms, right, whatever it is, there's always that one guy in the corner with the sunglasses doing his video from his car saying they're trying to force that into the story. Whereas to me, and I'm always very hopeful that my 13-year-old daughter and my 10-year-old son will live in a world where ideally it's not a big deal to have a gay character or a person of color or a woman in a traditional role. Do you bring that consciously into your work, or is it just sort of where you happen to play because that's who you are?
I mean, it is just who I am. It's not something that I bring in consciously, because it is just like part of my perspective and my experience. And I think a good example is one time doing a superhero story. I had a superhero that was battling like this like evil monster alien thing that had killed a bunch of astronauts in outer space. And then like, you know, finally it gets revealed and the monster is there. And then like somebody was like, oh, it's so cool that you made the monster a female. And I was like, oh, is it? But then they're just like, you know, like, oh, when I think like big monsters that are ripping people apart, I think, and I'm like, oh, I guess those are the moments that I guess you get like perspective. It's just like, it might, I might make a character a female that you would more traditionally see male, but I also write a lot of traditionally male, IP, like, you know,
right.
He-Man, Star Wars, a lot of the DC Comics stuff, the horror comics. I mean, all of that we like traditionally think of as like male stuff. Mm-hmm. I think, you know, I mean, I think we all know that of course women are fans of all of these things too, and it's a little bit of a skewed and ridiculous perspective. But you know, yeah, but I'm never trying to like have an agenda or be like, oh, we need 3 more gay characters and like 2 more women. But like, yeah, sometimes there are going to be same-sex relationships, or, you know, not everyone's going to be white, not everyone's going to be male, and like that's something that I'm happy to see more of, because I think it's good for storytelling.
Yeah. Yep. I couldn't agree more. I love that as a perspective. Again, it's just if you go in with what fits the story, and ideally the world that we are hopefully developing, it shouldn't make a big difference. But it's also important that there is that representation. It's such a fine and interesting line, and I've been kind of called out on it occasionally because, like I've said before, I made the mistake. The phrase that I used was, I hope that one day my kids won't notice one way or the other who somebody is or where the color of their skin is or whatever. But then there's also that side where the person said to me, well, it's important that they're still aware of who they are, because it's important to the people that they may be, it becomes sort of minimum. So it's an interesting time, I think. And so maybe through fantasy work that we get to do and original stories, and hopefully that will make things a little bit more comfortable for the world to be able to handle, I guess.
I think the crux of it is like, we hope that we get to a point one day where diversity isn't unusual, right? Where it is commonplace to see people from different ethnicities, races, religions, orientation, but like all the things being represented, so that we have these richer stories.
That's great. Yep. I couldn't agree more. I love that. That's awesome. If you could pick any IP that's out there that you haven't worked with, which one would you want to jump on?
Well, there's one that I can't talk about yet that I am getting to check off. So
That's excellent. That's good news.
there's one that I'm working on now that I haven't done. Let's see what else. This is such a hard question because it's so there's, I want to do everything. I'm trying to do all of the things. I haven't done much. I haven't done much in the Marvel universe. I would like to play more with Marvel in general. So I'll just say that in kind of a vague, broad way.
Excellent. Well, we'll work with that. That's good. And is there a favorite character that you've had the opportunity to write for that you was particularly memorable and one you were excited to jump on?
Well, Wonder Woman being the obvious answer, that one I was really excited. Doing Star Wars in general has been really fun for me because that's not a world I don't think I ever thought I would get to write anything for Star Wars. So I keep kind of pinching myself. Like the first time I wrote dialogue for Yoda, I was like, wow, I'm actually writing Yoda. That was like of all the characters, I think that was the one, like the first time I wrote a line of dialogue for Yoda, I was like, oh my God, I'm writing Yoda and like people are giving me money to do it.
Yeah. It's interesting too now because Star Wars, everything is canon. So every word that comes off your keyboard is forever, the story of those characters, which is pretty exciting, I think.
Yeah, it's cool. They let me kill a character that's in that's in one of the movies, like in the first issue, and I was like, oh really? I killed him, but I didn't think you would let me kill him.
It's funny. I think the internet believes that the story group is like this you have to bring your story in like in a robe in a sacred environment, and they look down on you and say your story is good or not. But they are more there to sort of advise you, right? To sort of say, no, that's good.
Oh no, I had to wear a robe.
Oh, you did? Okay, yeah, I thought so. Yeah, it must be really exciting to be part of all the different universes that you've had a chance to play in. Now you are you have I want to get the answer the answer. I want to get the title right. You already have the answers. It's a guided gratitude journal that's coming out in December. Tell us a little bit about that and the Halloween giveaway that you're doing.
Oh yeah. So you already have the answers. It stemmed out of actually something that I have been doing on Twitter for over 6 years now, which is I started, I don't know if you know this, the last few years have been really hard for a lot of people.
I've noticed for some people, including
some people like the world. It's been kind of rough. And I kind of, it was a little bit of an experiment that I didn't think would do much, but like, oh, maybe I can ask people questions in such a way that it helps them think about like not the toxic positivity, like everything's fine aspect of things, but like, hey, you've been through some really hard stuff and you're still going. And like, here are the people in your life who have been there for you through that. Or here are like the moments where like the kindness of a stranger turned your whole day around, or like this cool thing that someone did, or something that you did for somebody else that then changed your life. And so it was me, I started asking questions on a near daily basis that were like, like, tell me a story about a time that a stranger did something for you and it changed your life. Or what is something that you're proud to have survived? What's a way that you're different from your own upbringing that you're proud of? Like these kinds of things that acknowledge what we've all been through, and also like, hopefully help us feel a little proud of ourselves. And I kept doing it, and then I thought like a couple people would respond, but it became this thing that went really viral. And people kept responding. And when I would like stop doing it, people would be like, please, I love your questions, like do it again. And I noticed that in the comments, there weren't trolls. I'm saying this and then I'm going to curse myself. What would happen instead is people would chime in with their own story. Oh my gosh, that reminds me of the time that I also went through this hard thing. Or like, oh yes, this experience, I've had that too. And like people coming together and connecting. And I was like, oh, people really need this.
Yeah.
And so the journal, I've divided it up. It doesn't have to start at a certain time, but it's 12 months, and they each have kind of a loose theme, and there's a question for every day and a space to reflect. And you can either like do it with people and share your answers, or have it more privately for yourself. But that's where it came from, kind of organically. And then the giveaway that I'm doing right now, because it's October.
Yes.
Because really no tie-in between the two, but because it's October, and because I've done a lot of horror comics, mostly John Carpenter's Tales for Halloween Night, an anthology that John and Sandy King Carpenter at Storm King Comics do every year, and I've been in every issue since issue 2, and we're on issue 8, and so anybody that shows that they've pre-ordered, you already have the answers. I'm putting them in a drawing for a giveaway, and then I'm giving away signed horror comics every week until Halloween.
Excellent. Nothing like inspirational, self-affirming notes and horror to go
and murder. Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Really gruesome, messed up horror. Like, I do a lot of kids' contents and a lot of like very wholesome things. My horror comics, not that. They're very dark. There's a lot of blood. There's some gore. It's really messed up.
Well, now, are you a horror fan by nature, or are you it's just you ended up getting into that and you were good at it?
Sandy always jokes that she dragged me into horror. She runs Storm King Comics. She's also John Carpenter's wife and the producer of several of his films, and she's amazing. But yeah, she asked me if I would start doing some horror comics, and I was like, sure. I am a horror fan. When I was studying screenwriting in college, actually, the first script that I ever wrote when I was learning how to be a writer was a thriller script, because that's just what I wanted to write. So I think that's always been in me, but it was never something I had done professionally. So it was, much like the Wonder Woman thing. Then it was like, oh, the first horror thing I'll ever write professionally will be for John Carpenter. That's fine.
I don't. And it's funny. It's like every time you ask somebody like, what's their story? Everybody prefaces it by saying, this is an unrepeatable story, but we can, not an unrepeatable path, right? Nobody, but right. I hear your stuff. John Carpenter, Vice President Al Gore, Oprah Winfrey, Joan Jett, Star Wars, Wonder Woman, the DC universe, plus your original works. It's so cool to meet somebody who's got such a wide range and can do it all, which is so exciting and so cool. And it's been a real great pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you. Where can people follow you online?
I am at Amanda Deibert, and it's German, so it's DEI. And I'm on Twitter all the time, because that's how I procrastinate while I'm writing. So definitely follow me there. I'll be there. Excellent. And be on the lookout for your book and for the new Star Wars comic, which will be, I want to say early December, if I read it correctly. Yes, and yes. But Amanda, thank you so much. This was so much fun. I really appreciate you taking the time today to talk to us. Thank you. I had a blast. Awesome. Thanks. Let's hit end here, and bam.